Isaac Thorne stood before the judge, a ghost in the system, accused of a crime he didn't commit. But he wasn't in this courtroom for an acquittal. He was here to collect a debt, and the arrogant man on the bench had no idea his time was already up. It had started just after sunrise. Isaac's car was parked across from the old police substation on Sycamore Drive. The town of Forreston, Alabama hadn't changed. It was still a place that was careful about who it allowed to feel comfortable. Isaac wasn't there for comfort. He was there to watch. For weeks, he'd been mapping the patterns: patrol rotations, money transfers, behavioral tics. On paper, Isaac Thorne was a nobody. In reality, he was a former Marine raider, now a deep cover operative for the FBI. The target, a local cop, stepped out of the diner. Isaac logged the time. He noted the casual hand signal to a man across the street. It was subtle, too subtle. Isaac felt the air shift, the distinct smell of a setup that was too clean, too rehearsed. Then the cruiser appeared. No lights, no siren, just pure intent. Two white officers got out. One moved to block his rear bumper. The other marched to his window, swaggering like he owned the pavement. Isaac lowered the glass halfway, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. The officer didn't ask a question. He just tapped the window with his baton and barked, "License and registration." Now. Isaac's voice was low and steady. "You don't want to do this." That warning should have been enough. It wasn't. His rear door was ripped open. He was hauled out and slammed face down onto the hood of his car before the word arrest was even spoken. Then came the rehearsed shout, "Officer down!" Even though no one had laid a hand on them, the cuffs clicked shut. No struggle, no resistance. Just force, followed by a lie. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson clutched her grocery bag. She'd seen this scene her whole life. Black skin meeting steel and concrete while a uniform screamed danger. But this time felt different. A few feet away, Jenna Reed, a young journalist from Charlotte, had her phone out, recording. It was pure instinct. The man they were arresting hadn't fought. He hadn't even flinched. He just watched them, his eyes cold and knowing, as if he knew exactly how far they would go, and was letting them. They charged him with assaulting an officer. They claimed he resisted arrest. Jenna's footage showed a different story. Not one raised hand, not one word after that first calm warning. Still, they dragged him away like a caged animal. At the station, the story didn't add up. No priors, no warrants. The name Isaac Thorne flagged a dozen silent alarms in the federal system, but no answers. His file was sealed tighter than a tomb, the kind of seal that made local cops sweat. They booked him anyway. They called it procedure. Isaac said nothing. He just sat on the holding cell bench, his back straight, his eyes sharp, a man who had never learned how to bow. Behind the glass, a young deputy named Frank Cole watched him. He later whispered to a colleague, "That man isn't scared. He's waiting." And he was. Isaac Thorne let them take him, because the only way to gut a corrupt system is to let it swallow you whole and rot it from the inside. Right now, the rot was sitting in a courtroom across the street, wearing a black robe and calling itself justice. This wasn't a mistake. It was a mission. And Judge Alistair Finch had no idea the man he was about to humiliate had come to burn his world to the ground. They brought Isaac into the courtroom in cuffs. It wasn't necessary. It was a message. A hush fell over the room. His presence wasn't loud, but it consumed the air. Dressed in plain clothes, chained, he somehow looked like the only one in control. Judge Alistair Finch sat high on his bench, his fingers drumming a restless, irritated rhythm. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice like cold steel, "let's not waste time. Do you have a lawyer, or are you planning on putting on a show for us?" Claire Bishop, the court-appointed public defender, stood up. She looked rushed but determined. "Your Honor, I've been assigned to Mr. Thorne's case. We've only spoken for a moment." Finch cut her off with a dismissive wave. "A moment. Does your client grasp how serious this is? Assaulting an officer of the law isn't a traffic violation." Isaac remained silent. Claire turned to him, her voice a tense whisper. "Isaac, this is your moment. If you enter a plea, I can try to—" "I'm not pleading guilty," Isaac said, his voice calm, his eyes locked on the judge. "Not today. Not ever." Finch's eyebrows shot up. "Ah, so it speaks." A dry, grating laugh escaped his lips. It wasn't for the gallery, it was for himself. "Well then," he said, leaning forward with a sneer. "Tell us, Mr. Thorne, what exactly was a man like you doing casing a police station?" Claire stiffened. "Objection. That assumes facts, not an evidence." "Sustained," Finch muttered, annoyed. "For now." He turned his gaze back to Isaac. His tone grew colder, smugger. "I see here you were a Marine. One of the Raiders, no less. Imagine that." He leaned back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "They teach you to be a hero over there, just so you can come back here and act like a common criminal?" Isaac didn't flinch. "Why aren't you defending yourself?" Finch pressed, his voice rising. "Cat got your tongue? Or is this where the silent martyr act begins?" Still nothing. Just Isaac, standing there, his jaw set, his gaze unwavering. His silence was a weapon. In the gallery, Jenna Reed scribbled furiously in her notepad. She leaned toward Mrs. Patterson and whispered, "Why won't he say anything? He's letting him walk all over him." Mrs. Patterson never took her eyes off Isaac. Her reply was soft, but sharp as a razor. "That ain't silence, child. That's strategy." On the bench, Finch was losing his composure. "You're not special, Mr. Thorne. You don't intimidate this court. You're just another angry man who thinks his service record buys him a free pass." Isaac finally moved. He tilted his head just enough to meet the judge's eyes. One sentence. Low, firm, and final. "You think this is about a pass?" The courtroom froze. Finch leaned back, his smug mask cracking for a split second. A flicker of genuine unease crossed his face. Claire Bishop blinked, stunned. Jenna stopped writing. Mrs. Patterson nodded once, slowly. Desperate to regain control, Finch snapped, his voice unnaturally loud. "Bail is denied. Hearing is set for Friday. Court adjourned." Finch's gavel struck the wood with a crack that was a retreat, not a ruling. As the guards led Isaac away, he walked like a man whose mission could not be interrupted by steel bars. Jenna Reed leaned forward in her pew, whispering, "He's not just fighting this. He came to win." Beside her, Mrs. Patterson's voice was low and certain. "No, child. He came to end it." What the courtroom didn't know, what Judge Finch would learn too late, was that Isaac Thorne wasn't a defendant. He was the reckoning. The next day, the courtroom tension was thick enough to taste. Isaac walked in without cuffs, flanked by two guards who watched him like an unpredictable storm. Judge Finch was already on the bench, his jaw tight. Isaac's unreadable silence from the day before had clearly gotten under his skin. "Bring the defendant forward," Finch ordered, his voice flat. Isaac moved into position, calm and centered. Finch's voice rose, desperate to regain control. "Mr. Thorne, you seem to think your silence is a weapon. Let me be clear. It just makes you look guilty. In my courtroom, you are nothing. Not a soldier, not a hero. Just another number on my docket who will leave here stripped of any fantasy you're clinging to." Isaac didn't move. His silence wasn't empty. It was active. It pressed into the judge's words, making them hollow. Finch's lip curled into a snarl. "You think you're untouchable," he barked, the mask of impartiality gone. "You're just another thug in a uniform. You wear that honor like it's a shield, but it won't protect you in here. Not from me." The room went rigid. The bailiff shifted his weight. Jenna's pen froze. Isaac didn't flinch. He simply lifted his head and met the judge's hateful gaze. The look wasn't rage or fear. It was absolute control. It was a look that said, "I see you. I know what you are. And I am not the one who is afraid." The blood drained from Finch's face. He fumbled with the papers on his desk as if they could shield him from the weight of that stare. The courtroom held its breath. Near the jury box, Deputy Frank Cole leaned forward. He'd been an Army Ranger, and he recognized Isaac's stance. That was an operator. His eyes then caught the thin, surgical scar on Isaac's wrist. Cole had seen one just like it before, in a med tent overseas. He sat back slowly, a cold knot in his stomach. Everything he thought he knew was wrong. In the gallery, Jenna was shaken. This wasn't law. It was venom. She pulled out her tablet and ran Isaac's name through a series of backdoor searches. Finally, a red box flashed on her screen. Access denied. Counterintelligence flag. Lethal force authorized. Jenna's heart pounded. Who the hell was this man? Up front, Judge Finch was rambling, hiding behind legal jargon. But no one was listening. Isaac Thorne had taken control of the room without saying a word. His silence was louder than the gavel, louder than the hate. It was the beginning of Finch's unraveling. Later, in the dim quiet of the holding cell, Deputy Cole stood outside the bars. "You one of them?" he whispered. "The raiders?" Isaac, sitting on the bench, gave a barely perceptible nod. That was enough. Cole asked no more. That night, Jenna sat in a diner, her laptop glowing. She'd found him. A grainy photo from an old DoD newsletter. 5 Marine raiders in front of a shattered wall. 4 were named. The 5th, taller and standing apart, had no caption. It was him. Same eyes, same silence. In his cell, Isaac pulled out a small black notebook. They never checked for it. They thought the danger was in a man's hands, not his mind. He wrote, "Silence is not surrender. It's timing." He remembered a dusty rooftop, his team pinned down. He'd held up a finger. Wait. They waited. They lived. But he'd stayed behind, given himself up so they could escape. What followed was 3 days of darkness and pain meant to shatter his soul. He had stayed silent then, too. The mission was bigger than his name. This courtroom wasn't about a bogus charge. It was about watching the rot spread until you knew exactly where to cut. And that moment was getting close. Judge Alistair Finch had crossed the line from law to vengeance years ago. His son, Kevin, had been killed in a bar fight. The man who pulled the trigger, a black ex-soldier, claimed self-defense and walked on a technicality. In that moment, something inside Finch broke. He never spoke of it, but the poison began to work. He started handing down harsher sentences to black defendants, especially veterans. It wasn't justice anymore. It was revenge, served from behind the seal of the court. Judge Finch had an ally, Sheriff Gene Miller, a man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he'd helped dig the holes. Miller brought Finch fabricated cases, arrests built on shaky testimony while body cam footage vanished, and Finch made them stick. Together, they built a quiet kingdom of fear, but they were not invisible. Jenna Reed's investigation uncovered the pattern. 7 black veterans, all accused of aggression, all facing Finch and Miller. One had filed a complaint, then vanished. Jenna stared at a photo of the 2 men laughing at a fundraiser. This wasn't just corruption. It was a hunt. The pressure was building. At FBI headquarters, a red light blinked on a secure monitor. Isaac Thorne. "Sir, Operation Ironclad is accelerating," an analyst told the director. "He's moving to finish the job." "He doesn't have clearance to break cover," the director replied. The analyst's voice was quiet. "Sir, I don't think he's asking." In Forreston, the threats began. A dead-of-night call to Jenna's motel. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or disappear like the others." Her hands trembled, but her resolve only hardened. Meanwhile, Deputy Frank Cole, tormented by his conscience, slipped a folded paper into Isaac's cell. It was a list. The names of the men Finch and Miller had erased from the system. When Isaac read it, the final lock clicked into place. He was done waiting. That night, he cornered a talkative guard in an unmonitored room. The tiny wire on Isaac's collar recorded every word as the guard laid out the entire scheme of bribes and buried cases. Isaac now had the map. By morning, the courthouse was a powder keg. Jenna's article, "The Soldier Who Chose Silence," had gone viral. Reporters swarmed the steps. Veterans stood in silent formation. The public was awake. Inside, Judge Finch banged his gavel. "We will proceed. Mr. Thorne," he sneered, "does the defendant have anything to say before I render judgment?" The courtroom fell silent. Isaac stood tall. For the first time, his eyes swept the room, finally landing on the judge. "I do." His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner with absolute authority. "My name is Special Agent Isaac Thorne, Federal Bureau of Investigation, badge number 7305. A collective gasp went through the room. Finch's face went white. Sheriff Miller froze by the door. "For the past 6 months," Isaac continued, his voice like ice, "I have been leading Operation Ironclad, a federal investigation into systemic corruption and civil rights violations within this county." He looked directly at the judge. "Specifically into you, Judge Alistair Finch, and you, Sheriff Gene Miller." Finch shot to his feet. "This is contempt. I'll have you." "You'll do nothing," Isaac cut him off. He held up the list Cole had given him. "Because I have the names of the 12 men you made disappear. And I have a full confession from one of your own guards, recorded on a federal wire." As he spoke, the main courtroom doors swung open. FBI agents in tactical gear stepped inside, their purpose clear. "Alistair Finch," Isaac commanded, his voice ringing with finality. You are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and murder. Finch collapsed into his chair, speechless. Miller bolted for a side exit, but was slammed against the wall by 2 agents before he took 3 steps. The lead agent approached the bench and read Finch his rights while another stripped the black robe from his shoulders. The sound of Miller's handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the stunned silence. An hour later, in a sterile interrogation room, Finch and Miller sat at a steel table. In front of them were 2 documents, full confessions and resignations. "You sign these," the U.S. attorney told them, "and you might see the sun again one day. You don't, and you will die in a federal prison." With shaking hands, they signed away their power. From behind the one-way glass, Isaac Thorne watched. He didn't smile. He simply observed as the debt was paid in full. Justice hadn't been found. It had been delivered.